Hello everybody, and welcome back to the channel, and it is day 50 of the road to 2K on chess.com. Today, it's a little bit different style video to kind of celebrate the 50 days of progress that we've made, and I'm showing you guys a recent over-the-board tournament that I played here in Phoenix, Arizona at the Phoenix Chess Academy. This tournament was the August Game 30, in which you play 4 rounds against your opponents. I was playing in the under 1700 section, and I got these 4 games on the board that were quite interesting. There's a lot of the kids that play at these tournaments, so I've only put their first names on here and their rating to make sure that I protect those identities as well. But we'll go straight into the first round where I played Mr. Ethan, a young man, where I had the black pieces, so we're going to go ahead and flip the board here. He started with d4, d5, bishop f4, and I was like, oh great, we're going into a London system. So I played knight f6, knight f3, bishop to f5, e3, e6, and here I was already going for a symmetrical system. Now, a lot of times in these positions, I like to kind of break early with c5, which is giving an accuracy in this position, but oftentimes I just like to go off center and to try and create all this pressure coming down the middle. However, that's not what happened in the game. Is after e6, bishop to d3, I bring my bishop back, saying that if he wants to trade in this position, that we will go ahead and capture back with the h-pawn. However, he plays knight to c3, so in that case, we play c6, stopping the knight from jumping in, especially seeing that this dark square bishop has some pressure onto c7. Our opponent castles. We played bishop to d6. Our opponent steps back, and in this case, because I saw that our opponent had already committed his king to the king side, I took the bishop, so he has to double the pawns in front of his king, and we can see from the engine evaluation that we already have equalized, so we've done our job as black. Here we play knight b to d7, our opponent plays rook e1, we play queen to c7, just trying to exert some pressure here and give us the option of castling either way in the position. After e4, which was a critical break, we played d captures e4 after quite some thought. Our opponent captures back, and we long castled. Now, I got into this position, and I was feeling okay about where we were at. All my pieces were developed. I had some ideas of playing, h5, h4 at some point, assuming I can maybe displace this knight. Now, the one downside is obviously that my queen and my king are sitting on the same file, so I was trying to be mindful of that the entire time. Our opponent here actually played knight to c3, which I thought was slightly incorrect. I thought rather our opponent was going to capture like this, at which point we played knight captures f6, maybe plant our knight on d5 and play from there. But our opponent preserves the material, goes knight c3, we take off the bishop, our opponent recaptures with the queen, and we played e5, which was wrong. Now, in the position, for a long time here, I was looking at rook h to e8, it did end up being the best move to support this pawn push first, but I got worried about letting the h7 pawn become too weak. But now I look about it, there's not really an easy way for our opponent to remove our knight on f6, so that was a little bit of a silly mistake on my part. But after e5, our opponent plays d captures e, knight captures e, and I saw in this position that queen f5 check was a thing. I played knight e to d7 pretty immediately to block. Our opponent plays knight to g5, and here is where I think I burnt probably 12 minutes on my clock trying to figure out what to do, seeing that there's threats onto the h7 pawn, seeing that there's potential forking ideas on f7, but ultimately I ended up playing g6 to try and kick away the queen. Our opponent plays queen to f3, and here I opt to go ahead and lose a pawn, but at the expense that I get to pin my opponent's knight. So I play knight to h5, which is immediately wrong, immediately blunders, immediately loses the game. Our opponent plays knight captures f7, punishing our mistake. We play rook h to f8, and our opponent simply plays rook to e7, really taking the lights out of our position and just coming straight on to that 7th rank. Now, with any rook activity, as people typically know in middle and end games, is if you can get your rooks to sit on the 7th, 2nd, or the 7th rank, it's one of the best spots on the board for your rooks to sit. So we played queen to b6, trying to create some counterplay. Our opponent just plays b3, queen to c5, counterattacking the rook, and our opponent simply doubles the rooks, and now I was starting to see that really the game was slipping pretty quick. I opted to sack the rook for the knight. Our opponent takes with the queen, which then allows us to snap off this queen. And the engine evaluation gives this position as being equal because you have 2 knights for the rook. However, you are down a pawn, and these pawns are quite strong, but our opponent also has ideas of just gobbling the kingside pawns. So our opponent plays rook to d1. We played rook f8, and unfortunately, this just loses the game on the spot. I was running pretty low on time at this point, and the thing that I missed was that after our opponent plays rook to e8 check, we don't have anything left in the position. You're pretty much forced to take the pawn. The engine says that you can survive longer if you play king to c7, but at that point, rook captures f8. If you can't even capture the knight because it's pinned, there's just not much to do in this position. Our opponent even has moves like queen captures d7 check first. But alas, we played rook captures, queen captures, and we ran. And now in this position, you're going to see that the game is over. When you are playing time controls with less than 30 seconds of increment, the United States Chess Federation says that you don't have to notate. So unfortunately, I don't have the remainder of this game. But I can assure you that our opponent pretty cleanly converted the position. I tried to, once again, just get my pieces active, but there was not much left to play for in this position. So our 1339 opponent beat us in round 1 as a 1600, and the entire remainder of the tournament, I was kind of telling myself, try not to let yourself get too down. You need to rally here if you want to get any of your rating back. So with that in mind, we head into game 2, where I had the pleasure of playing Mr. Alec of 1424, and I got the white pieces in this game. I started with e4, d6, d4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, and knight f3. And we get into kind of a modern defense where I went with a 2-knight setup versus our opponent's dark square fianchetto. And an important thing to note in this game is that my opponent was playing incredibly fast. So I was already feeling the time pressure right from the beginning, as my opponent was, as soon as the move was written down, he was playing his next move. So he plays knight to d7, which I thought was a little bit weird. So I play bishop to c4 to get active, put in some pressure over here on the f7 square. Our opponent plays e6, stopping some of that pressure. I play bishop to e3. Opponent plays knight e7, I play queen to d2, saying that if my opponent wants to castle, they're going to run into some issues where I'm going to essentially attack the critical h6 square here. Our opponent plays a6, I play knight to g5, and my idea with knight to g5 was actually that if my opponent gets a little bit lazy here, and let's say they play a move like b5, I can actually sacrifice the bishop onto e6, and if our opponent takes, it's even worse because knight captures e6, and you've completely trapped the queen was my big idea here. However, our opponent found some time. They kind of had this look of, oh, I see it now. And they played knight to b6 first, creating an escape square for the queen, and also protecting the e-pawn with a bishop. I play bishop to b3, keeping material on the board. Our opponent plays d5, and we opted to long castle. And the reason I long castled in this position in particular is it looks like our opponent is going to castle kingside, and this allows me to start pushing these pawns on the F, G, and H files towards our opponent to create a pawn storm or a pawn attack on the on the king side. So our opponent played c6. I played h4, our opponent plays bishop d7, and I just go ahead and I smack him down the side of the board with h5, saying that if you're not going to stop me, I'm going to continue to push this pawn and shove it into the position and essentially force you to deal with what's going on here. Our opponent now played h6, at which point I played knight to f3. Now knight to h3 was a little bit better, probably to reroute to f4 at some point, or to play moves like f4 and knight to f2. But after knight to f3, g5, I did look at the sacrifice for probably about 5 minutes of knight captures g5, pawn captures, and then bishop captures g5, where we're going to try and once again push down the king side as quickly as possible. But I got nervous about the loss of material just because I didn't quite see the continuation from this point. So alas, instead of being aggressive, I opted to play knight back to h2 to try and get to g4. Our opponent plays queen to c7, and now I thought that was a little bit weird because I don't think they necessarily want to long castle, just because I don't know, all the material that they have is kind of more geared this way, and they've created a lot of weakness around the king with their pawn formation. But nonetheless, here I took my time, I kind of took a breath, and I played the critical move in the position f4, trying to break on this side, attacking this vulnerable g-pawn. The g-pawn obviously cannot push up because of knight captures to g4, just giving up a free pawn. And our opponent instead opted to play f6, which is the best move in the position. I saw this light square weakness pretty immediately, but there's no good way to punish it, so we had to kind of make our decision of what we wanted to do. I ended up going with f captures g5, f captures g5, and e5, closing the queen off from the position, closing the bishop off from the position, but relinquishing this square on f5 for our opponent's knight to go to. Our opponent long castled. We played knight to g4, and here I think the time situation was somewhere around the realm of 10 minutes to maybe about 5 minutes. I only had 5 minutes at this point. Our opponent eventually did play knight to f5, rook to f1, rook hf8, and here I was starting to scramble, and I realized that I didn't have many moves left because after I had played rook to hf8, rook d to f8. I thought that our opponent had knight to g3, forking these two pieces and winning in exchange, although he missed it, probably because he was playing a bit fast. But after rook hf8, we played knight to e2, covering that g3 square. Our opponent plays rook f7, and seeing the idea of the rook coming to get doubled, I had to try and figure out something quickly. So I opted to go with rook to f3, which was slightly wrong. Our opponent did end up doubling, and we played rook h to f1. Now here, unfortunately, is where we're going to see the game kind of take a turn. Is our opponent plays bishop to e8. I play bishop to g1, just trying to bring all my pieces to the defense of the king side. Our opponent plays knight to h4, just a beautiful move, attacking this pawn, attacking this rook, and there's not a lot that we can do. So I opt to trade off the rooks. Our opponent takes here. I trade out the second pair of rooks. Our opponent goes queen captures f7, and I ultimately play knight to g3, just trying to stop the infiltration of the queen by covering all of these squares, as well as now letting my queen defend the vulnerable g2 pawn. But our opponent played knight to f5. I took the knight off. Our opponent took with the queen. And here I play knight to e3, essentially just asking the queen where it wants to go. It's kind of tricky if the opponent enters the position because I'm going to try and trade the queens off as quickly as possible. But my opponent played queen to e4. I played g4, knight to c4, and b captures c4. And we get to this position here. Or sorry, I guess I should pause here for a minute. So after our opponent played knight to c4, I was starting to run really low on time, but I had to make a pretty quick decision on whether I wanted to snap this knight off with the knight or if I want to snap off with the bishop. And ultimately what I decided is that although our opponent does have the bishop pair, this knight, if I go as a kind of closed position, and this bishop isn't going to be able to do a ton just yet. So I go bishop captures c4, d captures c4, and knight captures c4, which was slightly incorrect. Our opponent took our pawn on g4. I played knight to d6 check, anticipating that if our opponent plays something like king to d8, we potentially have queen to a5 check, king to d7, and queen to b6. However, I did miss that hangs the bishop on g1. Now in time pressure, it'd be tough to see that. I hope that I would have seen it anyways. But our opponent found the appropriate response with king to d7. We played queen to f2, bishop captures h5, now creating a mate threat on d1. We play queen to f1 to defend, b5, king to b1, queen f3. offering to trade the queens. And now, because I'd already lost the first game, and because I'm the higher rated player, I did try to play out on this position, is I played queen to e1. Our opponent played bishop to g6. And here is actually where the first kind of critical mistake occurred. Is in the game, I initially played c3 and hit the clock, which is illegal because the bishop is pinning the pawns to the king. So my opponent got an additional 2 minutes here. But after the clocks got fixed, I ended up playing a3 to give myself an escape square for my king. My opponent played bishop to f8. I played knight to b7 because I didn't want my opponent to just trade the material and win the pawn. Queen to f5, queen to d1, just trying to defend my pawn, potentially get active on some more squares. My opponent plays queen to e4. I play knight c5 check, which is a fork of the king and the queen. But this bishop comes in, we capture, decapture c5. Our opponent blocked with queen to d5. And what happened in the game here is that, although you already noticed, the engine evaluation is heavily in favor of black. I played a move, I believe it was queen to g4 here. Our opponent tried to come back, maybe queen to g2. Sorry, not queen to g2. I don't really recall what they did here. I think they went queen to e4, and we had a weird repetition where then I ultimately tried to plug my bishop in on d4. And alas, although my opponent was playing much faster the entire rest of the game, in a position similar to this, my opponent actually flagged. They kind of froze at the board, and I watched as their time fell all the way down to 0. Their flag rose, and ultimately I won this game as a result of time. Now, definitely not a clean win. A lot of credit to my opponent, because if we look at the game review as it goes here, our opponent has pretty clearly outplayed us, 80.7% to 76%. And if we look at that graph, I really didn't have much of a chance the entire game. But GG's to Alec. Ultimately, we did get the win, so we moved in the tournament to 1-1. Now in Game 3, we had the pleasure of playing Ms. Anushka, who we have played in the past, and we had the black pieces. Our opponent played d4, and I have been working on my opening preparation, but I didn't really feel good about doing it in an over-the-board tournament yet. So after I played d5 and my opponent played c4, I went for e5, the Albin counter gambit. Our opponent plays the best move with d captures e5. We play d4, knight to f3, knight to c6, g3, and bishop to e6. Now, all this is still theory. All this is still book. It is a slightly worse position for black, as you can see by the engine evaluation already. But our counterplay is that we're going to try and develop very quickly and very actively. So ultimately, I play queen to d7, trying to take advantage of the weakened light squares, as well as gain my king castled quickly. Our opponent plays b3, immediately creating some dark square weaknesses, which I noted for later in the game. We long castled, bishop to b2, knight g to e7 to try and get some more pressure on this passed e-pawn. Knight to e4, we play knight to g6, bishop to g2, and then finally we take advantage of our opponent's weakening of the dark squares with bishop to b4 check, which is, in most lines of the Albin counter gambit, a pretty necessary move at some point. Now our opponent did find the best move with retreating her knight back to knight e to d2. At this point, we play knight g captures e5, winning back our pawn, and we can see that by being active, with all our pieces developed, and by really just trying to keep the pressure going, we've already turned the advantage to a nearly one-pawn advantage for us because we are so far ahead in development and we're restricting our opponent's pieces. Now here, our opponent played knight captures e5, we take back, and our opponent castled, which I thought was a little bit interesting, a little bit peculiar. We played bishop to h3, trying to weaken their light squares because they had fianchettoed their bishop. Our opponent played a3, and here is a moment where I had to pause, take a breath, make sure that my calculation was correct, and ultimately here I ignored the threat on my dark square bishop, and instead I played bishop captures g2, because if my opponent plays a captures b4, I was going to play bishop captures f1, I assume king captures f1, and then king to b8, defending the weak a7 pawn. But after b captures g2, our opponent took back with the king. We played bishop to c3, putting our bishop into the position, saying that if our opponent wants to trade, we are going to get a passed pawn. Our opponent played queen to c2. So at this point, I traded off the bishop. Our opponent takes back with the queen, and I find a really nice move with rook h to e8, finally activating all of my pieces, ready to go down the center of the board and try and support this pawn on d4. Our opponent plays knight to f3, and I found the critical move here of queen to c6. Now, queen to c6 is such a good move because you're pinning this knight to the king. The knight already has some pressure on it from our remaining knight on the board, and all of our pieces are very active in the center, which we're trying to build upon our own advantage. So our opponent played rook a to d1, at which point we played d3. And d3 is a really nice move because you can't take, because if you do take, then we're going to have queen captures f3 check, even though technically knight captures f3 is a little bit better. The opponent has to run back to somewhere in the position, and at this point you can actually go ahead, and I would probably play rook captures d3, attacking this rook and creating some more pressure on our opponent. Our opponent didn't fall into that though. Our opponent played rook e to d1 to try and defend, and in this position I was looking for a really long time at d2 to see if that worked. I didn't like the position after I believe it was rook to d1, and I couldn't figure out a way through. I also didn't like, although it is the engine's best move, d captures e2, with the idea that if queen captures e2, you play the beautiful move knight to d3, attacking the queen with the rooks defended in two ways, and you should be winning the material back here. But alas, what I opted to go for after about 7 minutes of thought was I played the move g5, looking for g5, g4. Our opponent plays e4, which I expected, so at this point I snapped off the knights, forcing our opponent to take back with the king, and seeing that this e-pawn was kind of stuck, but we do have this pass pawn, I opted to throw in the intermezzo d2 first, forcing our opponent to make a decision about the pass pawn. Our opponent plays queen to c2 because you can't step in front of the pawn for the reason that you have queen captures e4 checkmate. Our opponent plays queen to c2, and here is my favorite move of the game, favorite move of the tournament, honestly, is at this point I played d captures e1 equals knight check. The reason I under-promote to a knight is we have this check where I'm forking the king and the queen. It forces a response from our opponent because otherwise this would not be a check. Our opponent takes back with the rook. And at this point, I play queen to d6 because I want to enter the position. I'm up a full rook, and I really just want to consolidate and convert the endgame. I try not to be too flashy of a player, particularly with over-the-board events. So I will always try and consolidate my advantage if I can see it. Now, sometimes I don't always do that, and that kind of happens in this game, as you'll see. My opponent plays queen to c1. I play h6 just to solidify these pawns here and to try and minimize the damage elsewhere. My opponent plays king to g2, getting the king out of danger and allowing for it to get back to this back rank where it's a little bit safer. I play queen to d2, coming into the position, threatening a queen trade. Our opponent obviously declines. I play queen to d3, threatening the same queen trade and putting more pressure on this e-pawn on e4. Our opponent plays queen to b2, at which point I played rook captures e4. Our opponent plays rook to c1. I play rook to e2, attacking this f-pawn, attacking the queen. Our opponent plays queen to f6. I play rook d to e8, connecting my two rooks on the e-file. Opponent plays rook to c3, and here I saw the intermezzo queen to e4 check. Our opponent cannot block here, so instead what they do is they play rook to f3. I played king to b8 to get out of any nonsense where our opponent would be able to play a move like queen to f5, forcing off a queen trade, although I don't know why I was so afraid in this position of a queen trade. I'm up a full rook, and I should be able to convert these positions every time. I don't know, sometimes I get a little spooked, and I'm seeing ghosts. But our opponent plays h3 to stop the idea of g4. I played rook to b2, which looks like a full blunder, but I did have a little bit of a follow-up here. Is my opponent takes the rook. I played f5, trying to prepare g4. My opponent ended up playing g4, and I went for instead of takes. I did the calculations in this position. I initially looked at takes here, but I didn't like rook g3. I couldn't quite figure out the position after this point, and it looks like our opponent can just run to h2. So instead, after looking at the pawn race, I played the beautiful move h5. Simply saying that if our opponent wants to capture the pawn, we're going to push up with g4, and there is no way to stop the loss of this rook. If our opponent captures the opposite way, the same situation occurs where we play g4. But what happened in the game is that after I played h5, my opponent brought the king up to g3. I played h4 check first to try and push the king away. My opponent went back to king to g2. F captures, H captures, queen captures g4, and in this position, our opponent does have to be careful to try and not lose the rook just outright. So she did play rook to g3. We took with the pawn. Our opponent takes back with the f pawn, which then left rook to e2 check on the table, forking the king, forking the queen. The queen defends the rook, and in this position, our opponent put out her hand and resigned the game. So in the tournament, we moved to 2 out of 3. We secured a nice win with the black pieces, and we moved to the 4th game. Now, if we do look at the game review, this was definitely probably my nicest game of the tournament, as I played with a 91.4 and our opponent played with an 81.7. We found 4 great moves according to the chess.com engine, but we really did find a lot of tactics. We tried to keep our position sharp, and ultimately that did help us to make sure that we got to a positive result in the end of the game. Now, our final game of the tournament, we got paired against Farshid, who we had played a few times, and we got the white pieces. So I played e4. My opponent played e5. I played knight c3, the Vienna game, as you've seen many times on the channel. Our opponent played knight to f6, which invites us to play f4, the Vienna gambit. After d5, f captures, knight captures, queen f3. We get into a main line where oftentimes we're going to trade down into an endgame. My opponent played one of the best moves, knight to c6. I played bishop to b5, pinning their knights. My opponent took. And although the technical best move is to play something like b captures c3, I tend to prefer d captures c3 for the quicker bit of development. My opponent did play queen to h4 check here. I played g3. My opponent offers the trade on e4. And I went for this gambit line with bishop to e3, where the idea is if our opponent plays queen to capture c2, we play knight to e2. They can take another pawn. We're going to castle, creating a threat here on this pawn. And our opponent's best move is actually to play bishop to e6. However, the little bit of a trappy variation is if our opponent takes on b5, we play queen captures f7 check. The king is forced to d8, and before you give this check, what you have to do is you have to play knight to d4, attacking the knight and attacking the queen. If our opponent were to take here, what we do is we play bishop to g5, bishop blocks, and queen captures e7 checkmate. So it's a very trappy variation that I like to go for. It's still theoretically sound, and but if our opponent gets out of the position, they kind of find those critical ideas. It's perfectly playable for black as well. But ultimately, my opponent ends up playing bishop to d7, and here I kind of froze up. I didn't really know what to do. I was looking at long castles, but I didn't like it. So ultimately, I took the queen on e4, d captures e4, bishop captures c6, so that our opponent cannot win this pawn on e5 immediately. Bishop captures c6, and I played long castles, which is given as the best move. Knight to e2 is the other primary move in the position, but I didn't like that it allows our opponent to castle, because here castling is the best way to go about it. And this just feels like you're giving your opponent too much activity to me. So I went for long castles instead to have our rook cut off our opponent's king. Our opponent played bishop to e7. I played knight to e2. Our opponent castled, and here I played rook h to e1 to try and increase some pressure here on the e4 pawn, which is passed. Now my opponent played rook a to d8, and in this position I opted to bring my knight to d4, centralizing the knight, supported by my pawns with some ideas that I'm attacking this bishop, and if my opponent isn't careful, I am going to go ahead, and drop my knight on f5. So our opponent was not very careful. They played bishop to d5, which is immediately a blunder after the punishing move knight to f5. And it's such a punishing move because the bishop is pinned to the rook. This bishop is loose. And so after our opponent plays rook f to e8, we play knight captures e7 check. The rook is forced to take to avoid a loss of material immediately. However, here what we do is apparently the engine's best move is to play bishop to g5 to skewer the two rooks. Now, I thought that after f6, it didn't make a ton of sense to me. After something like e captures f6, I guess my opponent is able to play something like rook to f7. And here I probably play f captures g and just weaken the king. But what happened in the game was instead, I opted to go for the move c4. Taking advantage of this pin, saying that my opponent is unable to take. My opponent goes rook e to d7. I snap it off with the pawn, and here my opponent opted to take with the rook. Being up material, I had no qualms with this. I immediately snap off the rook, my opponent takes, and I play rook to d1, which forces another trade of the rooks, simply because if our opponent gets greedy and tries to take a pawn, it is going to be mate in two because of the back rank issues. So what happens in the game is my opponent takes the rook on d1, I play king captures d1, my opponent plays f5, and as any fans of Gotham chess or of any meme chess know, en passant is obviously forced. E captures f6, our opponent plays g captures f6, and here we play g4, trying to restrict our opponent from playing either f5 or h5. My opponent plays a6, I play king to e2, my opponent plays king to f7, and now we're both bringing our kings towards the center board, as would happen in a principled endgame. I play bishop to f4, creating a space for my king to come to e3. My opponent played c6. I play king to e3. There's no way to defend this pawn. This pawn will fall, and then we'll be 3 pawns up in the endgame. We will be even on material. Or what's the difference? It's the piece. So we're gaining a pawn back. King to e6, I played king captures e4, my opponent played b5, and here I found, I thought this was a really, really nice move, a great way to end my tournament, is after a couple minutes of thought, I played the move b4, which simply stops our opponent from playing either a5 or c5 without giving us a passed pawn, and that will also allow our king to get into the position quickly and snap off one of these pawns to create a second passed pawn, at which point our opponent's king is no longer able to stop us. Now in this position, after I played b4 and Varshit saw that there was no further progress to be made in the position, he resigned and I moved to 3 out of 4. So in this tournament, I came in as a 1600 in a U1700 section, and it was kind of a tough draw for me because I wasn't able to go through, and it's tough to gain rating when your opponents are lower rated than you, particularly in your section. And for those that are interested, by the way, here is the game review of that one. I played a nearly perfect game. This is a position I know very well, 97.4 versus 88.8. But anyways, my point is that after that first round loss, I think this was really a battle of the nerves, and seeing if I can calm myself down and kind of keep my cool and recover in the tournament. So what ended up happening is at the end of the tournament, I ended up in 3rd place, and I got this nice little trophy here from the Phoenix Chess Academy that shows. And really, it was my first tournament games in probably about a month after I've had some personal stuff going on that I had to travel for. I was unable to make the weekends. And this was almost a warm-up for my upcoming tournament where at the time that this video posts, I'll be playing in the Phoenix Open here in Phoenix, Arizona, in the under 1800 section, where hopefully we can have a good result and really get a boost to our rating. So I appreciate you guys watching the video. If you have comments on how I played in this tournament or how I do some of these little bit different videos, definitely leave it on down below. If you enjoy the content, obviously hit the like button. And then finally, check below, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, and that just helps you to make sure that you don't miss any future content of mine. And on that note, I will see you guys on the next day, and you guys have a good one.